Said, hey, I lost the number. This stuff going to. This is my way of taking notes. I think we've gone through this once before when we were up at Catfish Kitchen.
Yeah,
I had my little
sure,
recorder
yeah.
on, but I couldn't.
Yeah, now that I was on that ship when that picture was taken. She was leaving Pearl Harbor, 1940.
So that was your ship, the Richmond.
I served on it in 5 years, and then I went to a mine suite last 44. Now there's an article I think that many people ought to read it.
What is this in? Oh, okay. You don't have a copy of this, do you?
No, I don't that one, but you can take that and
Take it and scan it and bring it back to you? Okay.
Now the reason that stuck in my mind, while I was still working, I had to go to New Orleans, Louisiana. A company sent me over there, and I went to Houston, caught a plane. But while I was there, there was a little lady down there, and we were testing some bombs out in the Pacific, and she was passing out little coupons and giving us a bunch of trouble, and was uglying us for dropping the atomic bomb on Japan. And did you read this?
That's the highlighted part there, yeah.
Very few Americans know, but people know that.
That had Japan been invaded by the U.S., they had orders to execute all those people.
400,000 people.
I didn't know that either. That's the first time I've ever read that.
Now, on August the 6th, when we dropped the bomb, and the 9th, I was in Kobe, Alaska, on a mine sweep, and we were massing invasion forces there.
So that one act could have saved, although it took lives, it could have saved a lot more lives.
A lot more lives, plus our own servicemen who, no doubt, would have.
Right, it would have been a fierce
I
battle.
read an article the other day. I should have clipped that out. The reason they invaded that part, they felt there wouldn't be any. Japan would have their least enforced, but they had also figured out that we had figured that out, and had amassed quite an army in airplanes, and I don't know how many thousands of planes, suicide type planes. They were prepared to not let us come ashore.
So that intelligence that the United States thought they had, thinking that they were going into a weak spot, wouldn't have been a weak spot after all. Goodness. Goodness.
And I was in this battle.
So you were not only in a historic war, but you were in some of the historic battles.
See, Japan had captured 2 islands, the 2 in Kiska. That's the only U.S. territory that they did, and we were trying to keep them from bringing in supplies, and they came out one day and had us. Our intelligence messed us up and give us wrong information what was coming out, and they come out 2 to our 1.
Ooh.
We fought for 4 hours.
So all that fighting, and only 7 Americans lost their life. That's pretty incredible right there, I would think.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
See, we were about 16 miles apart. I was telling somebody there this morning. I went to VA and found an old Army man, I believe was, a sailor. Tell him. And you don't know what a long time is until you get in that situation, standing there on your ship, say 16 miles away. One of the prettiest days I ever saw up there. Normally it's bad weather. Water 28 degrees. And see the whole side of that Japanese ship just light up with the ugliest red fire you ever saw, knowing that he's fired shells at you, 8-inch shells, because they were heavy cruisers. And knowing that when he did that you are his target, and you wonder where are the shells going to hit. And then to look up after a short time and see them go over, and then see them go through the side of another ship about 100 yards away from you. That went on for 4 hours.
I bet that was tormenting, being on that ship.
You can't describe it. There's no words to describe it. You don't know what to do, so you do what you're trained to do.
Stand and fight.
Mm-hmm. It just can't describe it.
You're on a ship that's got so much surface on it, and there's no place to go.
No place to go. And when we first start out in battle, most of us put on life jackets. But on that day we took them off. Water 28 degrees. 3 or 4 minutes.
Right.
That went on for 4 hours.
I couldn't imagine that, being in that position. And that was just one battle too. You know.
Yeah. No, that's the only one that I got in just hand to hand. I mean, where we were shooting each other. Of course, we did some bombarding. We bombarded it at 2 up in that same territory, and that's the strangest thing too. And it took me. It was. I used to go to ship reunion, and I call that my Paul Harvey's story.
Page 2.
Page 2. March the 26th, no, February the 18th, 1943. We were bombarding the island of Attu. We went in and turned around and come back, and while we were going in bombarding this island with our guns, cloudy. A plane flew over us. We did not know whether it's enemy or what, because we're more or less in enemy territory because they're there. And some of our gunners, this thing doesn't last very long. And I'm told that we fired some anti-aircraft small arms at it, but it was fast. 58 years later, right here in Lumberton, I was wearing my hat, Navy hat on, and a fellow walked up to me and said, "Were you in the Navy?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Where did you serve?" And I said, "From Australia to the Aleutian Islands, Alaska, and all points in between." And he said, "I had a brother was in the Army Air Force." And he said, "You know what he told me?" He said, "They almost dropped a bomb on one of their own planes up there one day." I looked at him and smiled, and I said, "I can tell you what day that was, and I can tell you what ship that was. That was February the 18th, 1943, and that ship was the USS Richmond, because I was on it." And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What had happened? The weather's cold up there. It's freezing." He said, "Some of the men aboard that airplane, being cold and in their uniform, no restroom, they just urinated down in the bomb bay, and they couldn't get their doors open. It froze up some of the hinges and so forth on it." So that was 58 years later that I learned that. Now, I go to New Orleans that year to a reunion. And other reunions, we'll sit around a big table and talk about, and it starts out, "Hey, do you remember when?" And that's the way these stories. And so I brought that up. I said, "Do you remember when?" "Yeah, everybody remember that." And I said, "Now and then I got a Paul Harvey story. I'm gonna tell you the rest of the story. They almost dropped a bomb on us that day. Of course, we didn't. The rest of the crew didn't know that because they didn't." And I got the story from a man's brother, who was in that squadron up there.
That's pretty incredible. That it's funny how life comes full circle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Aren't you glad those guys had to use the bathroom that day?
I laugh and told people I used to get angry I'd see sailors and everybody else, just out here, they're drinking beer and whatever and just urinate any place. I said, after that instant, they can pee any place they want.
Probably saved y'all's life that day.
That's right.
That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yes, sir. On this battle, it doesn't say anything about it. But while this battle was going on, there was a war correspondent aboard our ship, and he wrote an article in the Saturday Evening Post a short time after this battle. I don't remember what his name but he was up on the bridge, where he could see everything, and a torpedo came up out of the water, went under our ship, and went on off.
So the good Lord was watching over you twice.
That's porpoising, called porpoising. See, what they think happened is that there was a submarine in the water, and he wasn't up where his periscope would show and whatever, and he was down. So when you fire a torpedo at a target, if you're down, that torpedo's got to come up, because they set it to run so deep in water. So if he was down, it had to come up and porpoise until he leveled out. So we figured that torpedo was shot just so close that when that torpedo come up, we were just right in the right at the right spot.
And mathematically speaking, that was probably
Yeah,
a 1 in a million thing.
yeah. Little things like that.
Yeah, you guys, like I said, y'all must have been living right.
Something. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to take this and make a copy of it too.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Yeah.
That's pretty interesting. Any anything interesting? I mean, yeah, anything interesting? Or I'm asking you anything interesting, and I already know two really interesting things that went on. Were there any other interesting things that happened that hasn't been written about that you know about? You know what I mean? Because you know you study, you look in the history books about World War II, and there's a lot of stuff written. But speaking of my grandfather and speaking to other World War II vets, I know that there's only what they wanted you to know about history.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes, sure. Let's see now. We didn't get the word from that Pearl Harbor was being bombed by Navy. We were on December the 7th, 1941. We were just at Ocean, just out of Valparaiso, Chile. We were going into the port the next morning. And I had taken my blanket off of my bunk, rolled it up, make a pillow out of it. Went up on top side. This ship, we had torpedoes on. I was on the other side, and laying under the torpedo tubes back there. The sun was shining, a pretty Sunday morning. We never had. That's some of these things happen at the time that it tears you up. We never had any thing to do on Saturday and Sunday, any drills or practices and like that. It was always a day off. And that Sunday morning, I'd gone up there after breakfast and whatever, and laid down. Everything was nice and smooth. That ship doesn't make noise. It's just maybe a little wind through the rigging, you know, and it was just comfortable, pleasing. And all of a sudden aboard that ship was a gong, 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 gong. That's general quarters. And shortly after that started, the boatswain mate came on, and they got what they call a boatswain pipe. They blow it, you know, all signals, yeah.
Right.
And they blew that. Now hear this, all hands to general quarters. This is no drill. Now that makes it further. After hearing the gongs, this is no drill. You think to yourself, what has gone wrong? So we all run to our station. You go forward on the starboard side, and aft, you go on the port side, you come back. That was the quietest drill that I had ever heard, and that was almost 3.5 years I was on them. Because everybody wondering, you know, what? So they go to their general quarters station, and then the captain comes on a loudspeaker and tells us that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And that old ship, she began to light off all the fires and the burners down in the fire room. And this ship had 4 propellers. They were 13 foot in diameter. That's a pretty good sized piece of propeller, 4 of them. And she kicked up water, partner, when they began to open those engines up to get those. It felt to me like that ship was coming apart. I mean, power, we had 90,000 horsepower on it. It was our thought At least I was told that was our thought, and we were told that we were going back to Panama Canal. They was expecting if the Japs had hit Pearl Harbor, they'd try to hit the Panama Canal. So we were going to search for ships out there in the sea.
So you got, prior to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, you guys had
Well,
no
we
idea that.
had a I forget his name, Marvin, whatever. He's passed away. He was a radioman. And all of our news, our radiomen, they were in contact with just the regular news in the States. They pick it up and do copy from it, and then may publish a little paper, and pass it out over the ship. And he picked that up, and he talked to us at our reunion when he read that. And he's also got his ship, the Navy, radios and stuff here they're in tune and everything, but nothing has been said. So he was telling us at the table as he talked about this, he said, the captain needs to know about this. So he took himself and took it on himself to go tell the captain. So we knew it. The ship knew it before the Navy had time to even tell us about it.
And all because of the radio operator picking up the regular news transmissions from
news transmission.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. Now, what we were doing, we were down patrolling the South America coast. I don't know why, but I can wonder why. Because Japanese freighters were leaving those ports loaded with everything they could pick up. And on just a few days before Pearl Harbor, we'd run into them. Now, at that time, when a Navy ship, a man of war, would run across a ship at sea, they would signal to them, they call it challenge, would say, "Who are you and where are you going?" And it wasn't to be nosy, but in case he was lost, they could say, we saw that ship here, so he's between there. And they were not flying their flag, and they would not answer back. So we'd circle the ship, and we knew it was Japanese. You can tell by the way they were built, but also the name on the stern of a Japanese ship, they used the word Maru. And then the name of their ship. We had USS.
Right.
So that went on there that whole week before.
So those guys knew.
So somebody had to know. And where this ship is going out, shortly ahead of there is a gate in Pearl Harbor that is closed. And 6 months before Pearl Harbor, I was a motorboat repairman aboard that ship, and we had boats that take us to and shore. And I was called away. It was after dark. I was called to come up on the quarterdeck, and I was told to get ready, get prepared to get aboard that boat. They needed me, and didn't tell me why. But the regular little engineer on there, he stayed aboard. I was a repairman. So we did, and it was dark, and it was unusual. Never do that. You never run with your lights off in the Pearl Harbor. But we did. Our lights were off. We had an officer aboard that boat. It's just about like a 26 or something foot boat. And he told us we were practicing. So from where our ship was docked, we went toward that outlet, and then we turned right back into the back part of Pearl Harbor. Japanese fishermen fished back in there a whole lot. It wasn't too deep for ships, wasn't many, but it was deep enough. And it was almost a couple of years before I found out that what had happened is that somebody thought that the Japanese had some midget subs, and maybe one or so or had gotten by that gate and was back in there. So it was that many years afterward that I found what we were really doing out there that night, sitting there just listening.
Hoping to get intel on those subs.
Yeah. So that's war. The generals, just the regular serviceman, has no way of finding out anything. He doesn't really need to, as far as that goes. But there's so many things that happen. I didn't learn that I were at some of the places that I were until after just some years here after. But there's a program on the television, you see, America at War, and it showed things that were happening, and I would watch it, and I said, well, I was in that area at that same time. What we were doing, I was on a scout cruiser, and we operated alone a lot, all the way down in the Pacific. And we had 2 planes aboard, and we'd shoot those planes off, catapult them off of the ship. And they'd go out, and we're traveling, and they go out, and then they go forward, and then they come back and meet us. We'd pick them up and refuel them and shoot them off again. We were looking for Japanese ships, because so that we begin to bring troops and so forth out, and we want to make sure we didn't run some troop ships into a bunch of battleships there, you know, and sink them. Now that's what happened when the Coral Sea battle was being fought. We pulled into an island called Tonga Taboo, which is not too far out of Australia. And the Coral Sea battle was with battleships. They were just bombing battleship. And the Lexington was put out of service and was sunk. And I was in the ice machines aboard that ship. That was my station. And I was given orders to make all the ice we can. It didn't say why. I just said make all the ice. We usually just not enough for the ship's use that day. So we made it, put it in the big freezer, and then the next day loaded in one of the motor launches, a boat, and I went with it over to, and I'm trying to find the name of that hospital ship, but I can't pick it up any place. And the survivors for that was off of the Lexington was on there. They didn't have bed enough for those men on there. And I can still hear the cry and the screams from those. They were laying up there on top side.
Just wherever they could put them.
Wherever they could put them. Yeah.
Goodness.
There's something that changed that, but we've got our first black president, but that's the first black mayor of any city in the United States of America.
And who is that?
Wilder, a guy named Wilder.
Mayor of Richmond, Virginia.
Mm-hmm. Me and my running mate on either side of him there. That other Paul, a guy named Paul Spuckett. Wherever you see me, you'd see him. Sailors back then, you never see a sailor by himself. He always had a buddy.
Anytime you left the ship, anytime you were on the ship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he had a buddy. Because he always had $1 or $2 on him. Not a lot of money, but he always had $1 or $2. And people, wherever you were, some of these foreign countries like Panama would roll you. They'd take it away from you, whatever. So you're just a buddy. You live in a room not much here, maybe 30 or 40 men sleep in here. Some of them you never speak to. You just talk to your buddy.
So you were tight.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like even after the war, you remained pretty close, huh?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I didn't because I left under unusual circumstances. They gave me 30 minutes to get off that ship, and in March, April of 1943, we was alongside a tanker, and I was transferred, and I get 30 minutes to get my clothes together and get on that tanker because another ship was waiting to come alongside. So that my buddy, I didn't give him time to say hello, so I didn't see him until September of 1991. Didn't know where he was or what, and went to a reunion in Richmond, Virginia, and there he was.
Almost 50 years later.
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, with that small world thing.
That's right.
Now, when you left that ship, you were still in the Navy, right?
Yeah, I left in April of '43. We were up in the Aleutians patrolling. Now, the Navy did not have sufficient or a fleet of invasion ships. So the shipyards had producing LSMs, LSTs, and other and invasion type. And they needed someone, so they asked for on board this ship what they call a first-class machinist mate with some diesel engine experience. And I was the motor machinist mate on boat repairman aboard there. So I'd gone to a couple of schools. This is some certificates that I'd have gotten from some of the schools that I attended. So I was number one man to go. So in '43 I left. They shipped me to St. Louis, Missouri. I went to a school, and that was making the engines to a mine sweep. Mine sweeps. I watched them make that engine, put it together, test it, take it apart, ship it, so forth and so on. And then when I graduated from that school, I went to Portland, Oregon, and waited there for a couple of months until my ship was launched. It was finished. So I went aboard that mine sweep, and there were in the engineering force there were 27 men, and only 2 of us had been to sea. That's how young, just took young high school boys and what have you, and took them. So, and I didn't get off of it until after they dropped the bomb up in Colby, Alaska. Left it. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Then from then I jumped all over the USA. The minute the war was over, there was no need for invasion fleets. So they had thousands of boats and ships and whatever and men without a job. They tied them up. So I spent, a year or so there. Going from Waukegan, Illinois, Great Lakes, St. Louis, Missouri, Lambert Air Base, Hitchcock, Texas down here, and then back to San Diego, California, and then back to San Francisco, just jumping around. And most of it was, I was a chief motor machinist, so what I would do would get about 100 men, and who they would process them, run them through the paperwork, get all their paperwork together, their pay up to this and all their information and so forth, and so they could go home. And my duty at that place was to line them up for the hour to shake hands and wish them goodbye and make sure they was in alphabetical order so that when they went across that stage there wasn't any mix-up. And that was it.
So you were master organizer then at that time. I bet that was a a lot different than being out there on that ship.
Oh yeah, yeah, it was a different world altogether. Yeah.
So which did you honestly like better? Did you like the
Oh, the now, okay, let me tell you, there's this thing. You have to know how the Navy taught its people. I don't know what they do now, but aboard ship, especially in the engineering course, back then, you take the engine room, the fire rooms, and the auxiliaries. Auxiliary would be the refrigeration and then the water making part of it. And you only stay as a personnel. You don't stay in a division in that and do a particular thing very long, in a matter of months. Now the reason for that is that if you stayed there all the time and then you got in a battle and this group over here got bumped off, nobody would know how to operate it.
Right.
So you do duties on this now, and then you move over and you circulate. You learn to operate any part of and any piece of equipment in that ship. Now something I teach people. Talk to young people when I can. When I first went in the Navy, there was an old timer, and most sailors then didn't get old. 40 years old, you had 20 years in, you retire, so you were a young man. But there was a sailor board there that took a liking to me. Just a young, still wet behind the ears and what have you. And I guess I think it was my country upbringing out here that caused this. And he told me, he said, now, they taught their officers the same way. They'd give an officer a duty in a division, and they'd change him to another division and change him to another division, so that during his lifetime or training period, he's able to go any part in any ship, and it just makes sense.
Right.
See? So he told me, he said, now look, they change their officers, they do this and that and the other. He said, now what you do? He said, as soon as you get a new officer, division officer, you, as quickly as you can, you listen and and you find out how he likes things done. And you break your neck to be the best. Because when you do that, if he had something special that he wanted done, you know who he's going to come and get? He's going to get you. So almost without exception, any place that I went, it wasn't long that I was #1 man.
because you made a conscious effort to be number one.
I made it to be one.
So that meant you got to do a lot of things.
That's right.
Smart move on your part, sir.
Yeah, it sure was. It paid off.
And smart move on his part to give you that advice, because I'm sure that helped you out in
I'll
your
tell
career.
You, yes, sir. Just little thing. That's now, I saw sailors who didn't like it, and you had 4 years to do, and you're gonna come. You're gonna be unhappy, and you're going out unhappy. But you can learn to do these things and enjoy it. So I love. And even the mine sweeps deal now, we had a squadron of mine sweep, and I remember the first thing in Portland, Oregon, they started making up the crew. I was the first man there in Portland, Oregon, as our crew began to make up, because our ship hadn't been launched yet. It was almost ready to be put in commission. And the chief engineer, who was a lieutenant, came in, and he sat me down and talked to me. And he said, look, I'm a battleship sailor. I know nothing about diesel engines. They promoted me, and I'm in charge. He said, I want you to be honest with me. Do you think you can handle this mine sweep, the engine part of it? If you can't, tell me, because I'm going to get someone that can, because I don't know a thing about it. I told him, I believe I can handle it. And what happened, I had 6 ships in a squadron, and I was called any number of times to go to other ships that had problems and help correct them. And when a year and a half after we left that port, went to sea and then came back in, the shipyard personnel, as we turned in work to do, came aboard and inspected the ship and looked at it and see what to do, and posted a letter on the bulletin. Don't know why I didn't save it, but said that the engineering spaces on that ship was in better shape than any ship that had ever left it.
So you did your job well.
I must have.
Yeah, you should have kept that letter. Ripped it off the wall.
You know, what happened, I know what happened. The other ships they of course, out on the farm, at 12 years old, I used to do work on my dad's tractors. He was a rice farmer that some of the men he had other working for him couldn't do. And aboard ship, you had these engines, and you had spare parts for equipment to bolt on and to use it if that part went bad. And those other ships, the minute something would go wrong with the one was on, they run get their spare piece and put on there, and then they'd repair the piece they had and put it in. Well, you got a used piece as a spare part now, back up. That somehow just didn't make sense to me. If we got time, why don't we fix it, the one that's on there? Mm-hmm. And then you've always got that new one to put on there, because sometimes it's a long way from home. And our men that I had, we trained, they studied, and they learned to do good work. So most of our spare parts that were new were still in the box. And that somehow a piece of equipment that's been overhauled and broken down and put back together runs better than even a new piece of equipment. And that's why that ship was in better shape.
Because you had that instilled in you at an early age, and you just carried it on.
Right.
That's pretty smart.
Mm-hmm. And then I learned a lot of I don't know whether I told you, but I told this sticks out in my mind. We was on a mine sweep and I went to Saipan. I was there one evening. I forget what day, but July, I believe it's August of 1944. I believe, when the first 15 B-29s came into Saipan and landed just before dark, just above the water. They landed. And they've hit them out there on the side. Then after a while, they had B-29s on Saipan, on Tinian, and then Guam. And I went over and we picked up a friend there in a Jeep, and I rode with him. And I went aboard one of those planes. If I hadn't seen it come in, I'd have bet you it couldn't fly. It was too big. Of course, they're bigger planes now than that B-29, right. But this was the big boy. And they let me go up in the cockpit and look, and the bombardier, an officer, was talking to me and friendly, and he was pointing out different men up as they were preparing this ship to get underway for a bombing run. And he pointed out every person on there and called my name and what he did. But one person he didn't pick out, and I don't know why I noticed that, but I did. And I asked him. I said, "Well, who is he? What is he doing?" He said, "Oh, that's the pilot." I said, "The pilot? Why, he's still shaved with a wash rag." He said, "Yeah, he's just 18 years old." And I said, "Can't believe it." He said, "Yeah, most of these pilots on these B-29s are 18, 19-year-old boys." See, a bomber is a level flight plane, up and down, just over, not like a fighter.
Right.
And he told me, he said that those boys that young are not old enough to be scared. And they know they don't know a whole lot, so they take orders to the letter. Do exactly what they're told. I used to do that as I talk to young boys. I see out here that the high school kids that thought they knew everything. And I said, you know, I can't get it out of my mind. There was that boy that flew that biggest plane almost that we had because he accepted authority.
Too bad things weren't like that these days.
No, they think they know it all. Yeah. I was hard to work for, too, out of the Navy when I came out and got a job with Houston Pipeline. I depended on my people. And when I hired a man, I was superintendent of 3 different districts in Houston Pipeline because of my way I operated. And the first thing I'd tell a man when I went on the job, don't you ever lie to me. I won't fire you. But I tell you, we'll fix it where you'll never do that again if you made a mistake. But do not lie to me. And they knew that. When I retired, I was superintendent of the Victoria District. I was superintendent of the Edna District. And then they sent me over here. They had an old-timey superintendent over here that wouldn't change his way. The company was updated and trying to expand out, and the big pipeline man would come and talk to him, and he would argue with him. Said, "We've been doing this way for 100 years. You know, it works fine." But there was a period back in the end when if you weren't growing, you was going down. This whole stuff had just been static, had played out. So when I retired, the day I retired, the big boy superintendent of the pipeline was down. He said, out of 12 districts, and up to that time, he said, when the superintendent retired, this was the only district that they did not have to send someone down to operate it until they could get a superintendent fit. Every man that worked for me knew what I would do if I went on a job out there, and I didn't show up. They knew exactly what I would tell those people.
It's what you call learning that respect up front.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's been my motto all that.
It sounds like it served you well.
Mm-hmm. I was telling 2 nurses this morning, they was asking me about, they couldn't believe I was as old as I was when I went to get my shots this morning. And they wanted to know some big thing, you know, in my life and so forth that helped me to get along. I said, I think the first thing I learned from my dad at a young age was that what you do for yourself dies when you die. What you do for others lives forever. And I said, that's always been my motto. Look around, if I can see someone that needs some help and I can help him, is to go help him. That's been my policy.
I like that policy.
Mm-hmm.
You remind me a lot of my own dad. I lied to him one time. Well, that's all it took. I think I was about 5 years old.
Yeah, no, I knew better than lying.
Like I said, all it took was once.
Yeah. I get so angry. I'll see these mamas and dads tell these kids something, and they'll look up why. Well, if I'd asked my dad why,
You'd be picking yourself up off the floor,
right.
I'm sure.
The word was because I said it. That's the reason you do it. So just some small things like that throughout has been my motto or my attitude in life.
Well, that attitude may not have only served you well, but that attitude and that philosophy may have actually caused a little dolphin or a little porpoising. Is that what we call it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I definitely want to make a couple of copies of this.
Yeah.
All I have to do is scan it, and I can bring it back to you.
Fine, no problem.
You have anything else you would like to contribute to this? I'm not going to say article because I'll probably make an article out of it. But like I said, I've met you, and I've met one other World War II veteran. And I'm going to try to just find all of them in this area that I can and talk to all of you guys. Again, I resort back to my grandpa. You know, he was in the war, and he's gone now, so I can't get his stories. But
anytime you want to come by, because a lot of this is in the past. I sit down and reminisce. I think I'm troubled quite a bit with the world condition situation. I see so much greed, and I've just never been greedy. I had a little thing to happen to me when I was 7 years old, and I told two nurses this morning. They was asking me about, be that old, surely there's some things that's in your life that, that you... I said, when I was 7 years old, we lived out in the country, and my mother had this gadget that hangs from the roof where you put a quilt on and they sit there and they quilt.
yes, sir.
And neighbor wives would come in and help.
And lower that frame.
And they lowered. And all of them had 2 or 3 kiddos outside. Now my initial is FH. But they call me by that. It's got a FH. FH, call me FH. And one day I was outside. They was in the house doing their quilt, and one of the ladies at the quilting frame here hollered out, and the other lady had gone close to the door or the window, whatever, and called the other lady's name and told her, said, maybe you ought to look out and check on the kiddos, the children outside. And she was in a position just right that when she turned around, she hollered back, or spoke in a long ballad. Said, you don't have to do that. Said, as long as FH is out there with them, they're all right. And at 7 years old, that stuck in my brain that when someone put a trust in me, I'd never let it down. I'd do what need to be done to keep it.
Once you gain that trust and gain that respect, you want to hold on to it. 7 years old. 83 years ago. And you're still the same way.
I'm still the same way. Man, I would do anything. Someone had to say it. Yeah.
And for some strange reason, I believe that. And I don't believe you're going to change in the next 50 years or so.
Yeah, I can get real serious here.
Okay.
I've often wondered. I've gone to a couple of funerals lately of people that's been dear to me, who had similar philosophies in lives that was always doing good deeds to others and so forth, and was real spoken of and so forth. And darn it, after sitting there listening to that, I'm ready to go. Life has become like a day to me. You go to bed, you get up, you wait in the morning, you wake up. You're glad to see the sun come up. And then during the day you do what needs to be done, a hard day's work. You look for a rest period. And that's the way it's designed. And I think life is that way too. You're here for a purpose, you do that purpose, and then you go home. You go to the rest. My Lord said in a good book, I go to prepare a place for you. that where I am, you may be also. And I'm looking to be with him.
You're ready to get some rest.
And at 90 years old, you don't see too many people running around, so I'm not saddened by it. In fact, I'm gladdened by it, that there is a place of rest for me.
I'm sure there is. And I'm sure you're going to be welcomed with open arms. Don't be in too big of a hurry.
But see, I was talking with someone one time about that. This was a number of years ago, though, because I felt this way then. They kept saying to me, well, there's something special that the Lord wants you to do. And I kept listening and reading, and then I finally come to it. No, there's not anything really special He wants me to do. He just wants me to be me as the best I can be. I hear so many people say what would the Lord do? What would the Lord do? And I tell people that's not the question. The question is, what would He have me to do? And then do it.
Very good. Very good. Totally agree with you. And I like the way you look at things, sir.
Now you see these two lady folks that walk by. I'm not related to them anyway. The one here, she's my, I call her live-in housekeeper, and she helped me with my health problem and so forth. And the other lady, she's done her that way too. She has Alzheimer's disease. So we're kind of a family here. And
It's good to have help.
Tell you what, my wife passed away in 91. And there come a period of time when if you sit down and let you don't know what loneliness can do to you. It's a miserable thing to not have someone to talk to, someone to think of you, and just those little things, That's the way I feel.
I really feel like that's why my dad passed away. His mother passed away 1 year, close to Christmas. And then the next year, close to Christmas, his wife caught herself on fire, and she passed away. The following year, close to Thanksgiving, his only daughter, my sister, passed away. July 4th the next year, he passed away because his heart was broken a little bit each year.
They see, I will not go look at a dead person. I've never seen my dad, my mother, my youngest sister, my only brother. Sometimes back, I resolved that I'm going to do the best I can to remember them in a pleasant day.
Right.
Maybe the Lord called them and whatever, and who am I to question it? I went to a funeral one time, a little black boy, 7 years old. I was running a pumping plant. I was just a high school boy, the rice farmer, and he just lived up on the hill from this river, on that plant to put in for rice farmers. And 7 years old, he'd come down and spend the day with me, sit there and talk to me and play. And he got hurt, had to have an operation, and didn't make it. I went to his funeral. And my dad and myself were the only two white people there. The rest of us are black. And there was older folks back here in the back were crying and so forth, and as they mumbling among themselves, is why a young boy and not them older people. And this preacher, he wasn't an old preacher, but he really worked on that group. He said, you have no right and reason to question the Lord when he takes a little fella. He said, if you had a flower garden out there, a rose bush, for instance, and you walked out there one morning after you'd been working on it, and there was a nice little bud there, hadn't opened up yet, do you have a right to reach down and pick it up? Well, that's the little boy's. It's what the Lord wanted, and he took him. And don't you question it. You accept it. And I've always had that feeling.
Well, that's definitely an analogy that will stick.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I believe if you sit and think these things through, you can you can come to a reason that that everything's gonna be all right.
Well, I agree with you, but in a way, kind of disagree with you. Give you an example. Here, 2 years ago, I told you my sister had passed away with cancer right before my dad. Well, she had a daughter and a son. They were 11 and 8 years old when she passed away. And they came to live with me, and I raised them. Here 2 years ago, the girl, Amber, she was 22 at the time, was brutally murdered. Her fiance choked her to death, or choked her, and then stabbed her to death. When I found out about it, hatred, you know.
Yeah.
Went and told my son about it. My son was 12 years old at the time. I had to go and tell them that, you know, because they knew her as their sister, because she was there all their life. Told my son and my daughter what had happened. And first thing that came out of my son's mouth was, I feel sorry for his kids. Which Amber's fiance had 2 children by a previous marriage. First thing that my son thought of was not being angry. It wasn't, I hate that man. First thing he thought of was the man's kids and how they were going to be hurt for what their dad had done. And he followed that up with, you know, I forgive JR. He's just going to have to find his own peace with God.
Yeah, but
you know? And it took it. You said you believe that you have to think, or if you think these things through, that you'll find sometimes it doesn't take thought. Sometimes it takes just a word from the mouth of a babe.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And you don't have to think because it comes.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that.
You know?
Yes, sir.
Huh.
Yeah.
But sometimes retrospect does give you a lot of it does give you a lot of, I don't know, a lot different view on life and on things. You know, you got to admit you've you know, you say you're ready for some rest, and I can't debate that. 90 years old, I can understand how you could be. But you got to admit, I've met one of your sons when I met you the first time. Knew your other son before. You got a couple of pretty good boys there. So, you know, you and your wife had to.
Well, now my neighbors here, the oldest boy, especially Fred. See, his mother, my wife, had a brain tumor, and I kept her here a couple of years, waited on her until it was getting me, and it was he came in one day and asked me, said, Dad, when's the last time you seen your brother? And I said, oh, it's been 4 or 5 months. I live down in Little Edna, Texas. He said, pack your little bag and go down and spend a few days with him. And I said, all right. So I did. And when I came back, then he met me And what he had done is put her in a hospital and put her in a nursing home because he saw it in me that it was getting me down. Now, I went there in Beaumont, and some neighbor down the street there had a relative in the same nursing home, so they knew about him. And he used to go see his mother every day. And if they hadn't had time to get to her, he would comb her hair, give her a bath, and set her up in there. And they still tell me about that when they see that. He loved his mother. Now we had a talk about doing things. I'll tell you a Christmas that some things that the Navy, as rough and as ugly and as mean as they are, this was my Christmas dinner, 1940.
You even got cigarettes.
Cigarettes didn't cost anything, but I've never smoked a cigarette. But they had them. Now, on that occasion, the ship's captain, San Diego was our home port. And on Christmas, the captain would send a request over to an orphan's home there. And he wanted 20 orphans. And they cut together, and they knew when they'd be down at the dock, so we sent a boat over and picked up 20 orphans. And they signed a couple of orphans to a sailor. And that sailor was to see that they saw any part of that ship they wanted to see and explain to them how it worked and whatever they wanted to quit. And then they had a special place at a table for their noon meal. And then every one of them got a gift. And then was taken and put back in that boat and taken back to the shore every Christmas.
And all this was done by a bunch of crusty old foul-mouthed sailors?
That's right. That's right.
That's interesting. That's good. Yes, sir, I'd like to make a copy of this too. I can tell that it's very meaningful to you because you kept it for 60 some odd years. But I can assure you I will take good care of it. I'll just take it down to the office and put it on my scanner, copy it.
It's self-explanatory. It's a Christmas menu.
Exactly.
1940.
Papa, do you have a picture of the ship you were on?
Oh, yeah, I got it here. This is Ann. She's my...
I'm his caretaker.
Caretaker / provider /
Yeah. Him and my dad's the only ones I know that were in World War II. Everybody else seems to be gone.
Well, I tell you, it's getting harder and harder to find them. And I do. I'll tell you what. I'm gonna hold your card hostage. I'll go and
drop back by here.
Well,
I'll dig out stuff, remember some things that.
Well, that's why I'm saying I'll hold the card hostage, because that way when I bring it back, I'll swap it for another one exactly. And before long, I'll have more stories from you than you care to share. But don't worry, I won't blackmail you with any of it.
Okay.
Are you doing stories on World War II people or just?
Well, you know, I've always had a fascination with it because my grandfather was career military,
Yeah.
and he was at Iwo Jima, and he fought in a lot of the historical battles as a Marine, and so I've always, you know, just listening to stories, I've always had this fascination with it, and you know, once my grandpa passed away, you know, you see fewer and fewer of
Fewer
them.
and fewer people.
And I know that he told me stories that, like I was telling him,
Each one's different because they all went through something different.
exactly. You were at a different, even
My dad went through something different than him, even though my dad was in the Navy.
There's the babies.
Yeah. My grandbabies.
but
But let me, the Marine is my number one military person. Let me tell you a story. I was on a mine sweep. We pulled into Saipan. And I went over, and when you board a mine sweep, only 186 foot long. It's pretty rough. You get on some terra firma every time you can. And run into a Marine, and I was asking him some questions and so forth. And he just said, listen, they're still shooting back up in here. And look back over in the underbrush and so forth, the way Saipan is a lot of them. And I was asking him some questions. And when he first went ashore, they put him on the rations and told him if they take prisoners, they had to keep them because the fleet landed them and come out, and they had to do the fighting themselves. There was other Japanese stuff around him. So he told me all this happened, and he said he pointed out he was advancing this fighting, and he said a woman came out of the brush waving a white rag, and she unbuttoned her bosom and was walking toward him, and he had his gun. And he said she kept walking, coming to him, and he started crying. Now he's an old sergeant, hardened. Those Marines had to be to fight on out in those islands, probably. He started crying. And he said, I shot her. And he said, if it had been a man, it wouldn't have bothered me. It's a matter of survival.
right,
But I shot a woman. And he said, when she fell, she had a machine gun strapped to her back. And behind that was a soldier crawling. If I had lowered my gun, they'd have killed me. And I wondered about that poor soldier, Marine, to this day, as to how much that affected him the rest of his life. I walked up this Garden Baxter. He had a go-away party down there. I went to that. And outside there was a Marine that had him a cap on outside as I was leaving him. I just walked out there and put my arm around him. And he looked up at me real quick, you know, then I stuck my hand out and shook it. And I said, were you ever on Saipan? And he said, no, I was on Tinian. He said, were you? And I said, no. Well, I just put you on Tinian and then run off and left you. I had to go by then, but I told him, good luck to you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
who knows? One of these days you may bump into that man again.
I'm going to look for him. Look for him. But, you know, let me tell you this. You've probably been told this 1,000 times. There is something that's among people that's been there that until you've been there, you don't understand. We have I can't explain it. But it's something you don't get out here on the streets, I'll tell you for sure.
Right. And it's something that no matter how many of you guys I talk to, I'll never fully understand.
Mm-hmm. It's there. That's right.
And I've got enough respect for you guys to know that
Mm-hmm.
You can tell me everything you can remember, but I'd still never understand it because I haven't been there. And the good thing about it, sir, because of you guys, I won't have to be. And neither will my kids.
You didn't have to learn to talk Japanese.
That's right. That's right. And I can eat my rice out of a box, Uncle Ben's. I don't have to do the.
Yeah. Well, anytime you feel like coming by, well, just talk with me. You know, I just love. I don't know why I love to talk. I don't really love to talk it, but I believe in my mind. I want. What I want is the best I can for people that's never been in military service to try to understand people that has been there. Have a little more compassion or whatever, you know. I went 5 years without seeing my parents.
That was your parent.
5 years. We went to Washington, D.C., November 1940. And we had to go to Germany. They was fighting, and we had too many ships over. Hitler somehow brought enough pressure that he thought we was going to, and they had to go. We went back. So my captain allowed so many crew members to go across country and meet the ship in San Diego, and I got to come through Texas and see my folks. That's a year that very few people know. They had 2 official Thanksgiving days.
In 1940?
In 1940.
I didn't know that.
That's right. I participated in both of them. My first one was in Maryland, and then the next one was in Texas. There was some thinking that Christmas, that Thanksgiving too close to Christmas, so the president moved it a week, and it was official.
I didn't know that.
In 1940.
So you got to eat turkey twice. And get away.